I'm Dick Rodgers. Banks create money, and it's a problem. Banks, commercial banks, create our nation's money, or very, very nearly all of it, as a debt with interest payable, and they get to allocate where it goes in the economy. And I don't think it's right. I think we, collectively, our society as a whole in Britain, with the Bank of England acting as our central bank, as our public servant, and the government acting as our servant as well, could create our money as an asset of the nation as opposed to a debt to the banks, with no interest therefore payable on it, just to have it as our circulating currency, whereas at the moment we do pay interest just to have it as our circulating currency to the banks who have created it and issued it as a debt. And thirdly, we would get to allocate where it goes in the economy, and we could put it to making a good productive economy and earning our living in the world. I think it's really important. Banks and their financial friends have captivated lots of people, and they go all hoity-toity and say, "Oh, you can't do that; it's inflationary." But I'm sorry, the commercial banks are creating lots of money. There's no reason, it isn't healthier for them to be doing it than for a public servant, the Bank of England, under the instruction of society as a whole through Parliament, to be creating it as a public asset as opposed to an asset of the banks for the banks, which should be created as a public asset in favour of the public. We can do it, and the banks won't change until they're obliged to. Their incentive is to make money for themselves, but we can, if we get our act together as a nation, stop that, change it so that the money is created by our society as opposed to by the banks, the commercial banks. It is a bit confusing, and there's a lot of detail to understand. But the experts would love us to leave it to them. But I don't think that's healthy. I don't think we should do that. When I get into discussion about this sort of thing, sometimes I feel like Daniel in the lion's den. But I've dealt with the Soviet government about various issues and tried to persuade them, and they agreed to what I requested. And I get the same kind of feeling about the banking institutions. And I'm afraid I've upset one or two people by asking for discussion. So in a sense, I feel I'm on target more or less. Individuals are nice. I'm not saying that individual bankers are rogues. Maybe some are, but the ones I've met, and I've met the heads of HSBC, RBS, Lloyds, and Santander all personally, briefly, and they all seem very nice. But there are difficulties. A typical conversation with a banker goes that, "Oh no, banks don't create money. They just take in money from savers and lend it out to people who want to borrow money." And they do that a bit, yes, but they do something else, which is to create money out of nothing, which is, in my view, illegitimate, even though it does seem to be allowed by our government. Partly because I think the government doesn't quite understand what's going on. I recognise that my understanding of the whole thing is incomplete, but I think I understand enough to know that there's what I could informally call a fishy business going on, and it needs to be put right, and the sooner the better. And I think it will be. I think we can manage to put it right. Then it's a grievous problem, and it's why we're in so much debt as a country. It's why we've got no money in the national kitty to do the things that we want to do as a country and run a good, humane society. And we've got to put it right. It's why lots of people are in debt. It's why houses are so expensive. It's why mothers generally have to work. I mean, some mothers want to work, but a lot of other mothers would prefer not to work and be able to spend their time with their children, but they have to go out to work, a lot of them, to get enough money to pay the mortgage. And it's why we are always lacking money to do stuff. So what I'm trying to say is banks create money, and they do it when they issue loans, so that almost all the circulating currency in our country is a debt to the banks, payable to them at interest, and they get to choose where it goes in the economy. And what I'm saying is that the Bank of England, acting as a public servant under the direction of the government, should be the creator of the money of our land. It should be therefore as a national asset rather than a debt by the nation to the banks. And then just to have it in our circulation as our circulating medium, we wouldn't have to pay interest. I mean, certainly, obviously, if someone earned money and then somebody else wanted to borrow it, it would be legitimate for one person to charge interest to the other to allow them to use their asset. But just to have it as our circulating currency, the whole of society wouldn't need to pay interest to the commercial banks or to anybody else. And we would get to allocate it to things, I think, to things that help us to earn a living as a country. So 97% of the money in circulation in our country at any one time is this money created by commercial banks by the act of lending. So only 3% is the notes and coins which are produced by public authority, the Bank of England, the Royal Mint and so on. In 1963, 79% of money was created by the banks, and 21% was created by public authority, cash. So in 1963, cash was 21% of the money circulating in our country. But as we all know, everything's gone electronic now, and people only use cash for little transactions. And it's only now 3% at any one time, although the cash circulates more slowly. So if you add up all the transactions in, say, a week in the country, probably over 99%, I have heard over 99% of those transactions would be electronic bank created money, commercial bank created money, and less than 1% would be transactions handled in state created money, which is banknotes and coins. The other problem is that if 99% of our money is created by the banks with interest payable on it, of say for the sake of argument 5%, so where do we get the 5% money to pay the interest to the banks? And the answer is by borrowing more. And we can only borrow more if we keep growing economically. We grow economically not because it does us any good. Certainly not, it doesn't do the planet any good. The planet can't stand it. But just to be able to pay the interest to the banks, and it's a mug's game. And we've got to put it right. Otherwise, it's like trying to fill up a bucket with a hole in the bottom of it. And banks, where do banks allocate this money that they have created out of nothing? They put it into houses. And that makes houses more expensive. It doesn't make any more houses. It just makes the houses that exist more expensive. And they do that because if they need the money early, they need to know that they want to know that if that they will get money for that loan. If the person who's borrowed the money for a mortgage to buy a house doesn't pay up, then they can turf him out of the house and sell the house and get money that way. And it's why it doesn't go into industry, because if they lend the money to somebody to buy a specialist machine, then if the business doesn't work and they can't get the money back, then it's very difficult to sell a specialized machine, much more difficult than selling a house. And if the loan to industry has been spent on other sort of soft values, if I may put it like that, like staff skills and training and so on, then really there's virtually nothing that a bank can get back out of it. And we actually have told, I mean, we've urged banks to have solid assets behind their lending. And so they put it into houses, really partly on our encouragement. And the Bank of International Settlements in Basel is the sort of international forum of bankers, and it's some assets are recognised as being safer than others, and the safe assets really are recognised to be mortgages and mortgage-backed securities or houses. So really, we're asking for it, and so And so if we're banking on the commercial banks being the source of our newly created money, then that biases everything into the money going into houses. And the trouble about that is that it makes houses more and more expensive, because whoever borrows more gets the house. So there's been a huge escalation in house prices recently, in the last sort of 20, 30 years, but particularly now in the last 5 or 10 years, until the recent crash. And so it's not a good way of organising the creation of our money. So how does a bank create money? Well, it does it when it lends. And when somebody goes to a bank to ask, say, for £200,000 to buy a house, the money that they're lent, if they are lent it, isn't money that savers have saved with the bank. Well, a tiny bit of it might be, but by and large it isn't. And the bank just writes it in electronically into the borrower's account. This is what the Bank of England says, and it seems amazing that so the bank isn't constrained by whether it's got the money to lend. It just magics it into existence by electronically writing it into the borrower's account. So having the money isn't is of no relevance, apparently, whether the bank has got the money to lend you. They'll just lend it to you by creating it, as long as the other banks trust them, and that is the rub. And as long as they think you'll pay the money back with interest. So you see, banks write it in to the depositor's account, to the borrower's account, and they consider it all okay, because there's a liability, which is the money that's going to go out to buy the house. But the bank says, well, against that we balance an asset, which is the borrower's promise to repay. And because those two are sort of thought to balance, then that makes it all okay in the eyes of the bank, and apparently also in the eyes of the banking accountants and the financial services and all regulators and people. But that's called double entry bookkeeping. But it's a fallacy, because it's overlooked the fact that a whole lot of money has been brought into existence. People would say it's credit, but it isn't. It's indistinguishable from money. You could use that money by various ways to pay your taxes, and if the government accepts the money, then really that is indistinguishable from money. Now, there's another way which has been recited how banks create money, and that's fractional reserve banking. Now, apparently this isn't quite as current as I thought it was, and I've been corrected about this by one or two people who know better. But if you take £100 of banknotes and you deposit in a current account in a bank, they will lend out as much as they can get away with, because then they lend it out at interest to somebody else, even though you could come back in tomorrow and ask for it back. So it's a jolly insecure way of running a bank, and it risks runs on banks because they've lent out the money that you have title to come back any time and request. And when they lend out as much as they can, say they lend out 90% of what you've deposited, say £90 of the £100, they'll lend it out to somebody else at interest. That somebody will pay it to somebody else to buy something, and the person they've paid it to will bank £90. And either the same bank or another bank will lend out 90% of that, which is £81, to somebody else who'll spend it, and the person they pay it to will bank the £81, and that bank will lend out 90% of that, which is £72.90p, and it all gets a bit complicated. And if that it gets lent, spent and banked. Lent, spent and banked many times over. Now, if it does it 20 times and the reserve kept is 10%, then after it's been round the houses 20 times, there's £790 circulating on the basis of the £100 which you originally banked. So a whole lot of money has been brought into existence by this trick of fractional reserve banking. If they kept a smaller reserve of only, say, 5% instead of 10%, and it went round 20 times, then instead of £790 being the total sort of cloud of stuff buzzing around the place, of money buzzing around in the economy, instead of £790, that would have risen to £1,218. So you can see that there's a whole lot of money based on the original much smaller deposit of £100, all sort of behind the scenes while you got your back turned, as it were, in the hope that you won't want to come and ask for that back straight away. So it's a terribly uncertain way of doing things, and it's deceptive, and it risks runs on banks. And they do as much of that as they can, apparently. If people get wind that a bank doesn't have enough to honour its debts to the depositors, if they think the £100 isn't there anymore, then obviously everybody rushes to the bank like they did to Northern Rock in 2007 to get their money out before it's all gone, because they realise that there's more promises out there than there is money in the bank. So it's an unstable way to run a bank. And banks have to trust each other for two reasons. One is that they all need to borrow money overnight if they're a little bit short, and if they can't borrow the money overnight, they go bust. And so they need to trust each other. And the other reason is that the banks all lend long and borrow short. In other words, they might lend money out for 25 years. I guess this is probably apart from the money that they've just created, but they in intermediation, just by taking in savings and lending it out to borrowers, the debt, the borrowing that banks do is usually over much shorter periods, a week or two, or a few months, or a year or two, something like that. And so they have, but the money they've lent out might be for a house for 25 years. So to cover that, they have to keep borrowing 3 months' lots of money. So therefore the bank's got to have a good reputation. It does a huge operation to keep up the reputation of the bank. It's all to do with reputation, but the trouble is it's all smoke and mirrors. And if banking was not conducted in this unstable way, that worry would not be there, because well, anyway, let's leave it at that. Increasing the reserve that banks have to keep against against runs on the bank may help a little bit, make banks a little bit more stable, but it won't stop the creation of money by fractional reserve banking, and that's the real mischief. And separating casino banking, betting on derivatives, also is a good thing to do, but it doesn't actually get to the bottom of the problem either. And the fundamental problem is the creation of money out of nothing by commercial banks. Another bit of fancy footwork that's done is securitization of mortgages. If a bank makes a loan to buy a house, then it gets in return a repayment agreement by the borrower. And normally it would then over the course of 25 years receive the money in dribs and drabs, but the whole thing is speeded up if they can take the repayment agreement and sell it to a dealer for money up front, the next day after they've received the repayment agreement, and that frees up money that the bank can then lend out, and so it just accelerates hugely the whole thing. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the American government-backed mortgage authorities, banks, guarantee more or less to accept a lot of these securitized mortgages. And that was a well-intentioned thing to help poorer people in America buy a house, but it's caused securitization to run away with itself and unwise lending to people who couldn't really repay. So look, what are we going to do about it? What's the answer? Well, I think the Bank of England should be the creator of money in our country, and I think commercial banks should be stopped from creating money in England. And I think the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee, there already is a committee of that name. There's no need really to rename it. It should meet monthly as it already does, but to decide, not to decide whether to raise or lower the interest rate, but to decide whether more money is needed in circulation in our country or less money. And if more money is needed, then it should just create it by just act of creation. And it should give it to the elected government of the day to spend on whatever the government wants. And you could say, we have to trust politicians. Well, we can at least elect them, or at least that's the idea. And a wise populace, a wise electorate, will elect a government that will promises to do wise things with newly created money. And in my book, the wise thing to do with money is so some people would say share it all out to everybody, just give everybody a dollop of money to spend, and that would get the economy going. Well, it probably would. Well, it might do. People might spend it abroad. They might spend it on imports and things like that. So I don't really advocate that. I think it's best to spend it on the things that help us to earn a living as a country, and also to do some good in the world and be paid an honest living for doing it. So in other words, to the tools for the job of doing good stuff in the world. In other words, infrastructure, get the railways and the roads running properly, train people up properly in universities and institutes of higher technical education, so that we've got really good people with their brain and good technical people, and scientific research, so that we've got lots of inventions coming on stream, and we can tackle things that the world, questions that the world really needs answers to, and product development, so that we can convert those into things that we can actually sell, products and services. Particularly on the export market, because that's what will get money coming into the country. And also I think particularly we should spend it on research about how to generate electricity and how to manage the other bits of infrastructure and utilities that we know we're going to need. At the moment, if you've got a good idea, the government can't develop it. It doesn't have any money to do so. And I think we should put money into developing means to generate electricity, for instance, which we know we're going to have to do a lot of, and I think we should develop that so that we can do it in-house. In other words, doing stuff, making stuff, providing facilities for running a really lively export economy. And the positive money, there's a group that I'm very enthusiastic supporter of called Positive Money, run by Ben Dyson. I think it does a fantastic job, and it's really got a momentum and dynamism about it, which is saying this, that commercial banks shouldn't be the creators of the money of our land. It should be the Bank of England, and that it should be given then to the government to spend on things. Positive money doesn't say what it should be spent on, but I think it should be spent on a productive economy, nurturing a productive economy. Positive money wants to distance itself from that because it doesn't want to get drawn into sort of political partisan things, and just to focus purely on the creation of money and getting that into public hands, out of the hands of commercial banks. So and you see, I think it's exciting, because if the Bank of England can create an amount of money Not too much, or we'll have inflation. Not too little, or things just don't have the lubrication to work. But if we create the right amount, then we can get a lot of things going in this country and working, which are not working at the moment. And the sooner the better, as far as I can see. Now, you may say, how do I know that commercial banks create money? Well, various reasons. The Bank of England tells me so, and there's lots about that on the Positive Money website. I also notice that in the years around 2005, GDP, the economic activity in the country, was only growing about 2% a year, whereas the M4 money supply, the amount of money circulating, was growing at 14% a year, much more than 2% a year. So somebody was creating a lot of money. The Bank of England says it wasn't them. So somebody was churning out loads of money at that time, and they stopped once the credit crunch happened. But until then, that seems to me evidence that commercial banks were creating money. The next thing is that there's muddle and obfuscation, willing obfuscation, I think, about this, and there are people who don't want the general public to understand what's going on.
You're on the phone.
And then there's the fact that the government is desperate to get the banks lending again. Why are they desperate to get the banks lending? It's because the banks are the source of new money in our economy, and if the banks decide not to lend, the money supply and the amount of money in circulation shrivels up. But I think that's an unseemly, sort of desperate struggle to get the banks lending. I think the creation of money should be in the hands of the Bank of England, which we can directly control, rather than having to go on bended knee to the banks to get them to lend. And the next thing is bonuses. What these bonuses to bankers? Well, I think the thing people don't notice is that it's easy for the banks to give bonuses to these top executives because they don't have to get it from anywhere. They just write it. They just invent it on their computers. But the problem is the activity that it encourages, and the bonuses are bonuses for getting people to borrow lots of money and businesses to borrow lots of money from the banks, and so that the banks can create money in the process of doing so, and they get the person who arranges the loan gets the bonus. Then there's another issue, which is an important issue really, and that is that the European Union rules and the whole way the EU is set up seems to favour this this take on banking and having banks create money. And Rule 126 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, the thing that was agreed at Lisbon, Rule 126 bans central banks from creating money and giving it to their national government. But we can change that if we want to, or else leave the EU. But I would love to see the EU not go along with the sort of philosophy that commercial banks have to be the rulers of everything. And then other people say, well, we can't make the change to having the Bank of England, the central bank, create the money as opposed to the commercial banks if everybody else in the world is running on the old system. Well, it would clearly be better for a global solution, but I don't think we need wait for a global solution. We should be arguing for it and pressing the case for it in international financial fora like the World Bank and IMF and all that sort of stuff, and G20 and so on. But I think we should just get on and do it, and it would do us a power of good, and people would see that this is a good way to run our country. So what should we do? What do I want you to do about it? Well, I'd like you to have a look at my website, which you may be on, and the Positive Money website, and then there are all sorts of interesting resources. There's James Robertson's very good website, and he's just produced a new book called Future Money, which I broadly agree with, although he advocates land tax and the citizen's income, about which I've said I've got reservations. But he's a great chap, and he's done a huge amount to keep this thing on the boil, and then really operate the democratic system. Learn about the issue, but then take the issue to your MP, by writing to him or emailing him, or going to see him at his constituency surgery, which you'll find details about on the Parliament website. And then if he doesn't do what you want, take others to see him, or raise a petition, or talk amongst your friends. And then this is a really important issue. Really get stuck into it and just be like a dog with a bone. And it may be, look on the Parliament website, the Treasury Select Committee. Under parliamentary business, you'll see committees, and if you put T for the Treasury Select Committee, with Andrew Tyree, the MP for Chichester, as its chairman, I think those MPs, 13 MPs up and down the country, are key. If you happen to be a constituent of one of them, that's great. If you know somebody who lives in one of them, that's also a good strategic thing to maximise the usefulness of the effort you put in. And write to the papers. Follow me on Twitter, Dick_Rodgers, and also the hashtag bank reform, which I've started. So the main thing is we want to stop commercial banks creating money. We want them to keep their hands off money which is deposited with them for safekeeping in current accounts. That should go, to my mind, straight through to the Bank of England and be kept safe there, so that even if the commercial bank, the high street bank through which it's deposited, goes bust, the money will be safe. And particularly, Positive Money has got this a bill which it's worked up in some detail, which could be made law, called the Bank of England Creation of Currency Bill. And I'm impressed with it. I think it's very well worked out. And your MP could be encouraged to inquire about that. And Positive Money have the details. And I do stress that I am not Positive Money, but I'm a supporter of them. And then if you have further queries, please talk to me. I would love to see momentum building about this issue. And I want to work hard at it. And I think it's the key to getting progress in our national life, because the world needs us. We've got to be out there shaping the world. It shouldn't be up to the Americans or the Chinese or Al-Qaeda or the market. We should make a conscientious decision that it's a needy world. We want to get stuck into doing it. But being deep in debt and having this financial fiasco on our hands stops us doing that. And it makes our own life a bit miserable. And I think we can be sorted out by taking things in our own hands, getting our own society with the Bank of England and the government working on our behalf to be the creators of our money rather than the commercial banks. Do get in touch with me. I'm Dick Rodgers, dick@rodgers.org.uk, Rodgers with a D in it. And I'd love to hear from you. Thanks very much indeed.